Hello and welcome to this webinar, Expert Tips on Creating a Cohesive Equipment Maintenance Culture. This event is brought to you by Engineering News Record and sponsored by B2W Software. Hi, I'm Scott Seltz, publisher of ENR and your moderator for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. In heavy construction, the synergy between people, technology, and process can determine whether an equipment maintenance program will flourish or fizzle. Join equipment maintenance experts as they discuss how best to achieve buy-in from all levels of the organization, while tracking the most important KPIs and the processes to support them, taking equipment uptime to 95% or better through a holistic, proactive approach. Please join me in welcoming today's host from B2W Software, John Kane, Product Manager of Equipment Maintenance Solutions. John has a leadership role in the development of the company's specialized B2W Maintain application for equipment maintenance and repairs. He has more than 15 years of project management, program management, technical data analysis and troubleshooting, and reporting experience. Now, before we start today's presentation, please enjoy this brief instructional video on how to use your webinar console.
Welcome to this webinar. Before we begin the presentation, I want to provide you with a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you will see a taskbar with icons. Each icon is assigned to a particular element of today's webinar. Click on the person icon to learn more about today's speakers. Throughout the presentation, you can network with others or submit questions to the speakers in the Q&A and chat box next to the slides. Download resources from the cloud icon. After the webinar is over, please take our survey to tell us how we did. Today's event is being recorded and archived and will be available within 24 hours. For on-demand questions or comments, send us an email by clicking Need Help? Email us. If you experience any technical issues today, please refresh your browser by hitting F5 for PC or Command R for Mac. And now I'm excited to turn it over to today's moderator.
And now I'm excited to turn it over to John Kane from B2W Software to lead today's conversation. John?
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We've got a lot of things to cover, a lot of information from our panelists. Basically, we're going to look at a few things. What can be achieved, getting started in this process, how to ramp up, utilizing people and processes, technology, leveraging data, and then we'll have a Q&A session for you to ask questions. So we all know that fleet maintenance management has a big financial impact on your organization. Traditionally, it's managed with paper, spreadsheets, and a lot of companies still use those methods for tracking this kind of stuff. Many contractors are realizing the advantages of adopting technology and software, but that requires a shift in your culture, your process improvement, to get support of that technology, and it's not an easy thing to accomplish. Basically, you want to accomplish a winning maintenance culture with these elements. That includes people, process, and technology. And with that, I'll introduce our panelists today. First up, we've got Jeff Bremer, who's the Vice President of Fleet at GeoStabilization International, who brings with him 25 years of experience. He's implemented maintenance software and processes across 5 different companies. He's basically headquartered in Commerce City, Colorado, with primary maintenance shops in Colorado and Kentucky. He supports fleet deployed at projects throughout the U.S. and Canada, standard and highly specialized equipment for geohazard mitigation. We also have with us Tom Garrett, Vice President Administration at D.A. Collins Kubricki Construction. Tom brings 37 years of experience across project management, estimating, IT management, and system implementation. So Tom's going to bring some great information from his experience. He's based in Wilton, New York, and his company provides a wide variety of construction, pavement, site development, and utility services throughout the Northeast. And we also have with us today Jennifer Angrisano. She's an industry business analyst with B2W Software. Jen brings over 20 years working in the equipment maintenance industry, helping companies become successful and efficient in all aspects of equipment maintenance. Jen has been instrumental in designing and training on processes and products that allow companies to meet or exceed industry standard KPIs, resulting in higher profitability. And of course, myself. So all told, we've got 62 years of expertise in the industry on over 1,600 pieces of equipment. Pretty impressive. So starting out, what are the goals? One of the first steps we need to take in this process is to define what we want to accomplish and how we want to get there. Jeff, I'm going to turn to you to kind of describe your process in defining those goals.
Sure. So, hey, John, thank you. So some of the goals that whenever I first come into an organization is one is organizing the team. It's and we'll see in a couple slides here later on one of the tools that I use to identify the roles and responsibilities. So it's to organize the team. It's to start to develop the maintenance management systems. It's always good to start off on the right foot. With the experience that I have, you need to make sure that you have your component codes correctly, that you have your reason for repair codes correctly. So it's good to get off on the right foot. Sometimes it's good to set a foundation, and sometimes you have to do a day two. It's good you get all the processes lined in line, and then you have to come back and you kind of tweak the system, and then ultimately it will drive. If you get it right and you can collect all your processes and you're collecting your data, you can start making data-driven decisions. And then just on transparency across the company, a reporting cadence is really important. Sometimes you enter into a system and you're not maybe completely clear on what the data you're going to get out of it as far as some of the second level reporting. You always want to start with ensuring that you get your preventive maintenance processes in place, including tasks and the appropriate intervals. So a lot of companies are manage and they say go out there and service that piece of equipment. Well, what's the definition of service? And it should include change this, pull a sample on this, and then actually there's some follow up. It's like it scheduled 5 samples. Did you get 5 samples back? Did they pull those oil samples properly? So there's just a lot that needs to take place whenever you first start up a system. So you're not. So once you're in the system 3 years down the road, you can you actually have good actionable data that you can use to drive the business.
Thank you, Jeff. And knowing all that, getting started is obviously a huge undertaking. Tom and Jen, what do you recommend in that process of getting started and getting things rolling?
Well, thanks, John. To start off, I guess the most important thing is to determine what the result you want to have. And that usually entails, trying to maintain your fleet, reduce your costs, increase your uptime. And also, part of the goals that we've tried to look at is preventing, the silo interactions between the shop and the field. The data has to go back, communication has to go back freely between the two sides so that everybody knows what's going on. So, define your goals is the first step.
And Jen, in some of the companies you've worked with, how do you get this process started?
So one of the things that I've seen a lot of companies look at, and I think both Tom and Jeff touched on it a little bit, is really identifying what processes need improvement. So I think one of the first steps that's a good thing to take advantage of is identifying what what the processes look like today. And a lot of people might think that that's silly, well, because we want to move on to better processes, but identifying how you're doing things today is key in kind of moving forward. I was recently I had a phone conversation with a company where they told me that in looking at some of their processes that are very manual, paper-driven processes, they did a little study and suspect that they're spending anywhere from $100 to $200 in soft hidden costs just from that paper moving around the organization until it gets to its final location, whether it be the number of people that are approving certain things, the data getting entered in multiple systems that don't talk to each other. So really, I think one of the first steps is to really identifying what your processes look like today, those roles and responsibilities of the people that are undertaking them, and then where you are going to go from there in the future. Like what goals do you want to have to improve those processes and roles and responsibilities?
Thanks, Jen. And Jeff, previously you had mentioned you had some spreadsheets that you shared with the panel in regards to how you identify those roles and responsibilities, because obviously we all know that people support the world they help create. So can you review these with us?
Yeah, so you can see on the slide there, the RACI stands for Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed. It's a really good tool to, and I encourage really any department manager, doesn't have to be maintenance or marketing or whoever, to take the time to go through these. And what it does is it establishes the roles, and believe me, you won't get it right the first time. It's a growing document, it's a living document. So it needs to be, you need to go back and touch it every once in a while to ensure that our processes are still in line, that something hasn't come up or we didn't forget something before. And then, so what it does is, you can see here across the top, you have the positions. Usually I'll put somebody's name in there because this is the person that's responsible for doing that. So you've got responsible, which would be the person that actually is doing the work, or performing the role. And the accountable piece is the person, usually that person who that responsible reports to, they're ultimately accountable that gets done. Consulted is, they might just be a counsel or somebody involved in the process that you go to get information from to help drive that responsibility. And then informed is a bit on the reporting end. They're on the receiving end of the reports. Just occasionally, you have to let them know what's going on with that particular role. But it's critical. As you can see here, it's just like who's going to create the PM schedules, who's going to issue the PMs, who's going to confirm and upload equipment meter readings, who's going to make enterprise, the ERP, hour meter adjustments. It literally comes down to that, the administrative bit. It's also managerial. So another benefit of having your RACI in place, even in the future, is let's say you have some turnover and you have to delegate, or you have to delegate a particular role. It makes it much easier to change the name up on top, put somebody else's name in there, or to move either move those responsibilities across within the matrix there. So it really helps organize. And plus, it's a lot of times whenever I come into an organization, they're like, I don't know, I just kind of just do everything. It's like, well, you probably just don't. So but it really helps just kind of give some structure to the organization.
Thanks, Jeff. In one of our conversations, you had also mentioned that you use a TLC method. Can you describe what that is?
So TLC is a total productive maintenance kind of methodology or philosophy. It's tighten, lubricate, and clean. And so we have various TLs. You know, it's kind of catchy, 10 or 11 care. Yeah, you're loving on your equipment, you know, taking care of it. But it really speaks to a lot of the preventive maintenance topics by, you know, if everything's staying torqued and properly fastened, things aren't flying apart. You know, a lot of the times something fails and it has catastrophic failure to other components or adjacent or attached to it. So the components are staying tight. Lubricate. We're keeping all of our equipment serviced. You know, it's just, you know, and then also with cleaning, you need to clean your equipment on occasion, so you can see if it's being lubricated, if it has a leak. You know, believe it or not, that dirt and everything that builds up on your equipment isn't keeping the oil in. If there's a leak, you need to see if there's a leak going on there. So yeah, it's just a general philosophy. It's kind of a catchy term that we use. It's an initiative. We just use it as a kind of a broad brush for something related to the equipment department.
Thanks, Jeff. And Tom, what are some of the problems that you've had to overcome in implementing new processes with your team?
I think the biggest issues that we've had is, you know, as you're changing the process, you know, is why do I have to do this? And I think that goes a long ways in explaining the why. Helps with the buy-in from all aspects of, you know, all the players in the system. That, you know, yeah, why are we doing this? Well, because what we were doing before probably wasn't the most efficient way, or, you know, this is a way to communicate across the company what our goals are, or just communicate what needs to be repaired. You know, the other thing is that, you know, our guys want to know that they've requested a repair and somebody's going to take care of it. And it's just not going into the big empty hole.
So a couple things I heard there. Yeah, exactly. It seems like transparency is the big item there. Also, it seems like the communication method has to be different based on your audience, right? I mean, when you're talking to your executive team to talk about and sell a new process you want to implement, that message may be different than the message to your group of mechanics, right, and parts people. So defining that message, you know, to meet the needs of your audience, I think in that case, along with the transparency, is huge. Which brings us right to our next topic, which is in regards to, you know, the culture and your people, and dealing with how you're changing that, how you're integrating processes, managing and involving your existing team, and getting buy-in. Basically, like it says on the slide, selling the why, right? So, Tom, I'm going to come back to you. And as far as technology, how did you keep it simple for your team? How did you get the team involved with that?
Well, one of the things is if you can show the people on the that are actually doing it that it's easier for them, that it, you know, it's simpler. They don't have to, you know, scratch on a piece of paper and hand it off to 3 different people, or fax it, or scan it, or whatever we used to do. It's you know, easier and simpler is a lot easier to get a buy-in than hard and difficult and complicated. So that's where the technology comes in. People are people, and, you know, you want to have a good process, but technology helps that ease of the angst of a new process.
Jeff, what about you? I know you've implemented some, obviously, some new technology in your processes. How did you overcome some of those hurdles?
So yeah, it's always important to develop a cross-functional team. With being with a few different companies, I've learned that if you can come in, I've learned a lot. I've learned a thing or two, and so usually whenever you come into an organization, you pretty well know where you need to be, and I'll usually put my hand out here away from myself, and this is where we need to be, and then I'll put my hand up close to me, and this is where we are. And a lot of people, they don't know what the process between my hand that's away from me and the hand that's close to me looks like. So that gives them stress, so they don't know what that process looks like. So by building a cross-functional team, since as a leader, I know where we need to be, but coming in, and you can't just pick that group up and plop them out there where they're going to be in 2 to 3 years, usually is what it takes to implement effective change. You can't just pick up the group and magically transport them there. You have to, it's a progressive change. You're going to implement preventive maintenance, and then you're going to bring in, and then you're going to implement an API between your telematics devices and B2W to update your PMs. So it's, as a leader, you develop those teams and you counsel the group, and you ask leading questions that lead them toward where you know that you're going to be, or where that you need to be. A lot of times I'll jokingly say whenever I come into an organization, it's just like change the logo on the top of the PowerPoint presentation, because it's really a lot of the same issues. We have to collect work orders, we have to schedule labor, we have to collect hour meters. We're probably not doing all that yet. So, and that's one thing that I heard somebody mention something before about, or Tom mentioned, knowing what you need. That's where a gap analysis is a really valuable tool. And just over the years, I've kind of established, okay, we need to make sure we're doing this, and then you can kind of measure where you're at in the whole grand scheme. So just having that gap analysis really helps with identifying what needs to be done.
I agree with that, Jeff, and it does take a while to get the implementation to take hold, and I think it's like practice. You have to practice it. You have to get to the point where your culture develops a kind of muscle memory that this is how we do it now, as opposed to backsliding into how we used to do it. But it takes practice, and it takes monitoring to make sure that the changes you're making are taking effect.
That's a good point, Tom. Just, if the new change was easy, then we'd probably already be doing it, because it was the easiest. So I agree. There's a lot of that, the motivation. Fortunately, whenever somebody new comes on, they don't know any different, so they're much more quickly bought in than changing, the processes for other people. But you do that by continue to talk to them and communicate. The day of do what I say until told otherwise really it's not the most effective, so you have to sell the why. One of the biggest benefits that I will tell the team is that whenever you look at, we're going to have better profits, we're going to have higher productivity, we're going to have lower costs. But one of the biggest benefits, and it's kind of neat to see whenever one of the biggest benefits is an increase in morale. You're not constantly having to fight fires. You're not stressing over, or you're stressing less over the things that just come up because you had no idea that we were going to have that problem. If you're doing proper inspections, which we're going to touch on here in just a little bit, you're going to minimize those emergency incidents, which actually it ultimately benefits, and it's palatable. The difference from 1 year to the next, once you've kind of got some of these processes in place, the stress is palatable, or the reduction is palatable. It's just a different organization.
So I think the important piece here, obviously, again, and I think Tom is the one who said it, is the transparency. And Jeff, to your point, constantly communicating and checking in is a huge piece of the puzzle. And we know that, a lot of mechanics have been in the role for a long time. They have a lot of legacy information in their heads. They can tear down and rebuild, a cat excavator without looking at a single manual. But when you hand them an iPad, they start to struggle. So it's closing that gap in technology with them, especially some of the more seasoned mechanics, right? So what are the things you do to get through that process? Is it just a matter of hand-holding, or what do you usually do in those cases?
I can speak. I don't want to speak over the whole time, but we literally we're using Jen as a resource. I came on with GSI a little over a year ago, and we got all the things, the groundwork established and moving forward. And then now we're coming back and retraining. Because whenever you do initial training, it's the proverbial taking a sip from a fire hose. And then so it's like, okay, I got this, and those are just the basics. And now we're coming back with additional training and support from Jen with B2W on helping us take the planning and scheduling and documentation all to a next level. Let's build on it and take it to the next level. Now, if whenever we bring in a new technician, they'll be brought in at that level, and they're like, well, yeah, we've always done that. They'll get that feeling. So that's one thing, is just as a follow-up on training.
Yeah, training is huge. Training and keeping current with that, which really does segue us into our next subject here, and that's actually the technology itself, right? And how do you use the technology? What does it bring to your team? What efficiencies have you gained? Tom, you've implemented technology, iPads and so forth, in your with your team. What are some of the benefits you've seen from that, and what are some of the processes that you've implemented that with?
Well, I think one of the things you have that data at your fingertips when you have the tablet. It's not, I got to go back and look at a book, or I got to go back to, my office to look at something in a computer. I will say that I'm continuously surprised at some of the people that have embraced the technology quicker than I would have thought. Anybody out there, don't be scared that your seasoned mechanic is not going to want to embrace this, because you might be very, very surprised.
Yeah, it seems that the younger generation are coming in already predisposed to use technology in its highest form, right? Something that's pretty common. Jeff, I'm sorry.
Touching on that, John, real quick, is these are not 10 years ago tablets either. It seemed like there was a point, maybe it was about 10 years ago, to where, yeah, we had technology, but it wasn't very intuitive, and it was kind of almost more of a hassle than a benefit. But now it's kind of, the software has become so much better, and there's an occasional glitch. But software has gotten a lot better, so it is a little bit more intuitive than what it used to be. So guys, they're hands-on. It's doing things in the background, but once you get it in their hands, it's usually not as much of a hurdle as what maybe they had perceived, just because it's a little bit more intuitive, user-friendly.
Right, and you had mentioned previously inspections. How do you leverage technology for that?
So electronic inspections. I presented at ConExpo earlier this year on this, and the title was Electronic Inspections, an effective communications tool, because it literally is that. it's electronic. It's connected to the internet. But it's on a tablet. So and there's a GPS stamp that's included with it. We've actually developed our own in Power BI, but I've worked with other groups and created those. The electronic inspection, since there's the device is GPS enabled, or when it's GPS enabled, it has a GPS coordinates stamp. So it actually indicates, since I'm doing the inspection here, I say that it's on this piece of equipment, it assumes that piece of equipment is here. So you actually start to you can actually even generate a map of where all of these inspections were performed, and then you can kind of see where all your equipment is. So it helps with annual physical inventories. If you require it to take a picture, you can do that. But then it also collects meter readings. It helps with transportations. If you get a picture of the piece of equipment before it's transported, and you do a pre-trip inspection before it gets transported, and then once it arrives, you can indicate, no, it arrived like this, or no, it left like this. So that's electronic inspections are definitely a huge communications tool. But then it also it's a confirmation that the inspection was done. So we're starting to develop a compliance method that says in B2W was the equipment documented as being utilized. If it was, we're going to tie that to we're going to go out there and search to see if there was an inspection done that day. So we can actually, and getting away from the paper forms, we can actually say, okay, it was operated and it was inspected, so we're in compliance.
That's great. That's a good use case. I hear from a lot of companies who are actually doing that very same thing. But as we know, those kind of things, you had mentioned meter readings. The technology landscape for a lot of these companies includes, telematics, as you mentioned, which drives your preventive maintenance, knowing where your equipment is, longitude, latitude that comes in with that as well. And I know, Jeff, you basically are using a company for telematics to bring in our meter readings and locations. Tom, are you capturing meter readings and location information the same way?
Yes, we started probably right after ConExpo, and we're probably about 90% done as far as putting the telematics on every piece of equipment. So we're not quite there yet, but we're pretty close.
Have you seen any kind of incremental benefits thus far?
Yes, because it solves a lot of issues. Well, that wasn't on my job, or did it run where it is? It's the way I looked at the ROI on it, just the amount of some 3 different people had their hands in collecting, reporting, entering meter readings, easily paid for itself within a couple of years.
Right.
Yeah, that's a
KPI.
there.
I had the benefit of operating a company in Vegas in 2008, and we paid for the telematics systems in theft recovery. So yeah, there's all kinds of benefits. Yeah,
that's a big one. And obviously, with this technology comes data, right? So the benefit, obviously, of a software solution is getting the data out. As I mentioned previously, a lot of companies start out using paper, and they develop a really, really tight process with paper. But at the end of the day, It's hard to report on paper forms unless you've got a file cabinet that's 10 miles long that you can paw through. Not an easy task. So the goal really is the data and the KPIs and how you're measuring that data. Obviously capturing data just for the sake of capturing data is not something you want to do. It's got to be actionable. You've got to be able to, it's got to be readily available, that kind of thing. It's got to be consistent. So Tom, what are the KPIs you're looking at capturing with the technology that you've implemented and some of the processes that you've implemented across the organization?
Well, I mean, we do use, some of the dashboards that B2W supplies. And I guess one of our things is if you're not measuring something, how do you know if you're doing well or not? That's the thing. You can't get any better if you don't know where you've been. So that's what the KPIs are for, just to get a handle day to day as to where you are and are you getting any better? Do you still have a lot of emergency repairs compared to your regular things? Are you spending way too much time on overtime to take care of things where if you planned a little bit better, you wouldn't be working that overtime? We're also trying to develop a KPI for response time. How long does it take to get somebody on site and take care of something and cut down on the downtime?
Yeah, that's a big one, downtime. Jeff, in previous conversations with you, you'd mentioned that you have had great success in capturing and tracking downtime in relationship to operating hours and things like that. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah, so at GSI, we track down days as a percent of work days. And what that is our field team, they document production delays due to due to equipment as something happens. And our jumping off point in 2020 was in January was a little over 4%, and we set targets throughout the year so far. We set our targets at 2. I think we ended the year at 2.1, and we are below 0.5. I have not seen the kind of gains at other companies that I've seen here at GeoStabilization International. I think it speaks a lot to the culture, and we, I think Tom mentioned before to reduce the silos, siloing of departments, and that's one benefit that we have here. But yeah, it's and it literally is implementing preventive maintenance. It's scheduling repairs, doing oil analysis, so we're whenever something doesn't look right, we're scheduling that repair. So yeah, that's one of the biggest things that we're working on. Idle time as a percent of operated time. Everybody always thinks of fuel savings. That's probably that's a big one. But even broader than that is if that equipment is only working whenever it's the hour meter is turning, you're actually going to be doing fewer preventive maintenance services just because you're only working, you're only doing preventive maintenance from the time on the hours that you've been working because the hour meter, the engine was turned off. So you're actually going to do fewer, which might cause you to have to reduce your interval just based on the condition of your oil whenever you sample it. But that's a really good one. But the other one is the benefit of a lot of times whenever we're doing equipment replacements, we're basing those off of an hour meter reading. And the big thing is always it's really based off of what your CapEx budget will allow, because you're kind of a trade-off between R&M and CapEx. But it actually will push, if you base it off of hours and you have fewer hours per year, you're going to have more years with that piece of equipment, which actually could reduce your capital spending.
Yeah, that's great information. Thanks, Jeff. Jen, I know when you're training companies and you're in there setting up processes and so forth, you help them develop some of these goals in regards to KPIs. What are some of the unique KPIs that you've come up with for some companies, or some that you've heard of that that some companies are tracking?
Well, I guess it's the ones that we actually have in our software. A lot of them will look at the number of labor hours they're spending on a particular type of work, whether it be emergency, preventive maintenance, scheduled repairs, capital improvements, to get a basis to improve on particularly your emergency. Schedule compliance, so whether a work order is completed by the end date of when the work order is scheduled. That's a big one that a lot of companies like to improve upon. Even overtime versus regular time, percentage based on that. That's really some of the bigger ones.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I guess companies can really be as creative as they need to when it comes to how they spin the data, right, and to meet their business goals. Very important stuff. Well, thank you all for your time today and all the information you provided. Really, really important and great stuff. And I'm hoping our listeners can utilize some of these processes. Right now, I'm going to turn it back over to Scott, and we'll be able to take some questions.
Thank you, John. And thanks, everyone, for a great presentation. Before I have our presenters address some questions that have been submitted throughout the program, I want to remind our viewers that we'd love your feedback on our webinar survey to help improve our programs, which is available on your screen now, or you can complete it at the conclusion of the event today. And as our viewers enter their questions, a couple of questions occurred to me during the presentation. One is, and John, I'll focus it towards you, and you can share the question with the others. How big does a company have to be, or how many pieces of equipment should they have before it makes sense to invest in specialized software for maintenance?
That's a really good question. You've got to look at your business process. I don't think that it really matters about size, because I think there's benefit, and there's a lot of products out there, of course, but I think there's benefit in automating some of these and digitizing some of this information that you're capturing. And really, at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. It's capturing data and having the processes with that data. So I think, I'll let some of our other panelists chime in, but I think company size, is not usually that important. It's basically, how do you want to improve your company and how do you want to move it forward?
Jeff, Tom,
Jen, anything?
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think it's really the size of your company, but it's the value of the assets that you are trying to keep track of or protect or be able to use in its most efficient manner. I mean, I would say that is probably more a driving force than, the size of your company.
Yeah, it kind of comes down to what cost does it take to implement the system and to manage the system. Obviously, if you've got a big multinational company, then the benefits will be dollar for dollar much greater. But the challenges of getting it the processes standardized across all of the different companies, regions, is a real challenge. So that's why whenever you implement something, you need to make sure that you have very good standards. And it's standards even like we create work orders and we only use these component codes. And we identify that there are only component codes, including in the component codes, not, with BMRS codes, and not work types. And with, not fabricating. Fabricating is not a component. So there just has to be standards set up, especially whenever it's with a big organization, because if you don't, you literally will have 4 different sets of data, and you really probably won't be able to compare the 4, for example.
Great, thank you. You touched on ROI. What does ROI look like for maintenance software? How long would it take to recoup the cost of the technology?
I will say. I'm sorry. Oh well,
no, go ahead,
it depends on. Yeah, it just depends on the organization. It depends on the cost, the upfront cost. I've seen, usually whenever I'm presenting a project, if there's less than a 3-year payback, just as a real quick qualifier, if it's less than 3 years, it may not be looked at. It may not get approved. The ROI, it really depends on the organization.
Okay.
If I could chime in, I think it. I'm sorry, Scott. I think it really does depend on the company's capability to, stand up the software product and any technology that they want to put in place along with process. So, the more willing and capable they are of implementing that, the sooner they'll start seeing, the ROI on the investment.
Good. Viewer writes in, how do we incorporate this across multiple pieces of equipment of varying ages in remote locations that often lack cell service? And his example is, if my rock drill doesn't have a cab, where can I keep the tablet for it? Are there solutions for integrating this type of technology?
So I saw the question come across there. Is if it's in reference to electronic inspections, then it's most of those operators will have a phone, and most of the electronic inspections that I've implemented have store and forward functionality. So even though it doesn't have cellular coverage, at the time you can still do the inspection. It just saves it until you get back into reception. Now, if it's B2W, I'd have to lean on Jen or the B2W team to answer that one. But then in reference to the cab, usually that phone's in your pocket, so that's one way you'd be able to protect it.
Yeah, I think working in offline mode is a big benefit. So if you're looking at a software product that allows inspections, I think working in offline mode is very common. It's a common requirement for these software products, simply because you're probably always going to be in a situation where you are out of cell service or definitely out of Wi-Fi service. So the capability to capture the data anyway and then sync it up to your server from the device at a later time when you do get into, a Wi-Fi signal or back into cell service is important. So, but there are also the ideas that, of meter readings. If you're a smaller company and you don't have a telematics provider that a third-party provider that you deal with, a lot of companies will set up a process to capture meter readings manually. So they'll, capturing meter readings once a week is probably, the best process, and having, people just their role, and as Jeff mentioned, roles and responsibilities, their role is to capture meter readings on a job or in an area where the equipment is and get those submitted so that, PMs can be done on time and any other processes relying on those meter readings can be handled. So there's ways around it. I guess in some cases it might be creative, but in the case of technology, I think it's common to have products available that can work in offline mode that are very effective.
Thank you. The same viewer asked an extended question to this, or another question basically. How might this interface with manufacturer-specific systems such as Comtrax, or how do I interface it with my Oracle system?
So with regards to, and I know this is a B2W discussion, but if we're talking about electronic inspections, I worked with a company, with a business intelligence company at my previous employer, that we received APIs from all the major manufacturers, from Contracts, from Vision Link, from JD Link, for John Deere, from Volvo, all of the major manufacturers. They have API feeds from their system that you can partner with this company, and they will. And it's basically they're an aggregator. They can pull all that data into one system, and you can see all of your equipment on the same screen per se. Now, as far as Oracle, yeah, I can't speak to that one.
Sorry, I threw you a fastball. A question that occurred to me. Another question that occurred to me is we're waiting for our viewers to provide some more questions to you all. Realistically, how long does it take to replace paper and spreadsheets and get up and running with the software and the related process changes you've talked about?
That's a good question, and that's probably one of the first questions that, as a company, as a software provider, we get asked when we go in to implement the software. It really does depend on the company's ability to get the buy-in for the software and the processes. There's no standard. In other words, some companies find it harder than others. Some find it really easy, and that could shorten the time. But it's also important to not shortcut the time either. I mean, as Jeff mentioned previously, it's important to get the right data in place, because obviously when you're rolling out a software product, the data within that, such as maintenance codes, is a huge facilitator of how your equipment is doing, where the mechanics are putting their hands, and where those patterns are showing up. For instance, if you have component and subcomponent codes and you've got them specific to your fleet, and you take the time to define those in the software product, you can now report on exactly how many times the same subcomponent went down on the same piece of equipment. And of course, that makes the shop manager make certain decisions, right, with his provider or his OEM, things like that. So, there's really no set in stone time frame that it should take. But again, using tools to roll it out, and understanding the team you're rolling it out to, what technology you want to leverage, and then getting buy-in, it really does determine that. Jen, maybe you can chime in on that as well, because you deal with that pretty much every day of your life.
Yeah, so one of the things that actually Jeff mentioned earlier on in this presentation too, that I think is important, and that John mentioned, it really is up to the company how long it takes, to really roll it out. Something important that Jeff did mention and talked about is kind of this continuous improvement thing. So when you start out, you identify things that you want to be able to track, but then over a course of time, you might want to improve on that, or you might start off small. So, for instance, we'll a lot of times have the companies that might want to just start off with tracking their preventive maintenance and their work orders at a very basic level, labor, parts, that type of thing. And then as they get that down, then they'll improve their processes a little bit more and want to move on to the next step, which might be now implementing, using the schedule and actually really scheduling the work orders and being compliant with that schedule, and then even taking it further where companies won't start out right away, particularly if they don't have very good inventory structures. Maybe they wait and implement inventory processes and purchasing a little bit later. And it really does depend on the individual company, and that's what my job is primarily, to work with new customers and existing customers to make sure that the software helps to support the processes that they're looking to implement.
Yeah, and I'll add
Great.
in there that Jen does a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add to that real quick, guys. To that point, that it depends on the organization. I've been in organizations to where certain regions, the company has implemented, has bought into the whole software and everything, and it's doing great in certain regions, and it just does not seem to get off the ground in other regions, and it literally comes down to support. It's either they're not given the resources, the people that are in place, just maybe they're just not fully invested in the effort. So it not only depends on within the company, but literally within each management team.
Very good. A viewer's asking questions about data, and specifically, how is data storage addressed? Is it part of the software, or is the customer responsible, or from a third party? Where is the data housed, and how long is it stored?
Well, that varies. If you've got a cloud solution, it can be stored on, external servers for as long as you need it to be stored up there. There's also, speaking specifically in regards to B2W, we allow a choice between the data being stored on local servers within the company. Their IT department sets those up, gets those running, and the data is stored there, so they have access to it right there. So it depends on sometimes the size of the company. I mean, a lot of smaller companies, they don't want to have the spend of an IT department to manage a server farm to accommodate that data. So they'll house it in the cloud where the data is still accessible. They're just not, housing it locally. So it depends on, your capabilities from an IT standpoint, I think, as far as where the data is. As far as how long it's stored, it can be stored as long as you need it to be stored there.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question, and this one's a good one. Any advice for convincing reluctant owners that it's time to invest in this kind of technology and process improvement for managing the fleet?
So my advice would be start tracking the impact. And be persistent. But obviously, if you're talking with the owner or the CEO, you may become too much of a pain. But you got to handle it tactfully. But then also be prepared. It depends on, we talked about the audience of your message. The CEO wants to hear payback, or the benefit. Sometimes depends on your culture. The benefits to the employees are they going to have a better quality of life because of it? You just have to. Some of them are the intangible benefits. But yeah, be persistent, but try not to be a pain. Sometimes it's like, I know of a solution, and then you bring it up and you present it, and then something comes up a little bit later. It's like, hey, I know something that we could do there. And so, it literally, it often takes, sometimes years, a year or two to get the message across. And then it sometimes maybe the team is not that open to it, so for whatever reason.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. Please join me in thanking Jeff, Tom, Jennifer, and John, as well as our sponsor, B2W Software. If you have any additional questions or comments, don't hesitate to click the Email Us button on the console, and we'll share those with our presenters so they can respond to you directly. Please visit enr.com/webinars for the archive of this presentation to share with your colleagues, as well as information about our upcoming events. We hope you found this webinar to have been a good investment of your time. Thank you and have a great day.